You ever turn on the news and it feels like they're speaking a totally different language? They're throwing around words like GDP, inflation, unemployment. Well, today we're going to decode all of that. We're going to give you the tools you need to finally understand what's actually going on with a country's economy without all the confusing jargon.
Yeah, these are the big ones, right? You hear them constantly. GDP is up, inflation's a worry, unemployment is down. But what does that stuff really mean for the health of a country? Let's break it all down piece by piece.
All right, so let's just jump right in. We've got to start with the absolute basics. Before we can get into all the little details, we need to see the whole board, the entire puzzle. And that puzzle has a name: macroeconomics. Think about it like this. Imagine you're looking at a huge forest. You could spend your time studying one single tree, right? Or you could zoom out and study the whole forest, the weather, the animals, how everything works together. Well, macroeconomics is that zoomed out view of the whole forest. It's all about the big picture.
So, the big difference here?
It's all about scale. See, macroeconomics is like flying in a helicopter, getting that huge bird's eye view of the entire country's economy. Microeconomics, on the other hand, well, that's like getting out the microscope to look at one single person or one single company. Both are super important for sure, but for today, we're staying up high in that helicopter. So now let's look at the key issues that macroeconomics really helps us get a handle on. And a great way to think about these is like an economy's vital signs, like when you go to the doctor. They're the core measurements that tell us if the economy is healthy or if it's struggling.
Okay, vital sign number one, inflation. You might know it by its Urdu name, Mehengai, which I think a lot of us are familiar with. All it really means is that, on average, stuff is getting more expensive. The money in your pocket just doesn't buy as much as it did yesterday.
And this example makes it super clear. Let's say a unit of electricity was pretty cheap back in 1990. But fast forward to today, and that price is through the roof. That huge gap between then and now? That's inflation, plain and simple. Same electricity, just a much higher price tag.
All right, our second big vital sign is unemployment, or bekhari. Now, it's not just about not having a job. The official definition is actually pretty specific. It's about people who want a job, they're able to work, and they're out there looking for one, but they just can't find anything. And getting this definition right is a big deal because it's how they calculate that official unemployment rate you always hear about.
So let's be crystal clear. Somebody with a degree who's polishing their resume, sending it out, going on interviews, but just isn't getting any offers, that person is officially counted as unemployed. It's that really tough spot between wanting to work and not being able to find it.
Okay, so we've got these vital signs, inflation and unemployment. But how do we measure the whole thing? The sheer size and growth of an entire country's economy. You know the saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it? Well, economists came up with some really important tools for this.
And the two most famous are GDP and GNP. Gross domestic product, or GDP, adds up the value of everything made inside a country's borders. It doesn't matter who made it. On the other hand, gross national product, or GNP, measures everything made by a country's citizens, no matter where in the world they are. So one focuses on location, the other on nationality. Simple as that. But this leads to a really, really good question. If GDP goes up, how do we know if it's because we actually made more stuff? Or is it just because everything got more expensive thanks to inflation? It's a tricky problem, right? And you know what? They came up with a pretty clever solution. They created two versions of GDP. First, you've got nominal GDP. This one uses today's prices, which honestly can be super misleading. But then you have real GDP. And this one is kind of the hero of the story. It uses prices from a fixed point in the past, what they call a base year, to give us a real, true apples-to-apples comparison. It basically strips all that pesky inflation out of the equation. Check out this example. The country produced the exact same amount of electricity, 1,000 units, but the nominal GDP, using today's higher price, comes out to 15,000 rupees. The real GDP, using the old price from the base year, is only 5,000. See? Same amount of actual stuff produced, but the numbers look completely different. So here's the absolute key takeaway. Real GDP tells you if we're actually producing more. Nominal GDP can go up just because prices went up. So if you really want to know if the economy is growing, if we're making more things and providing more services, you have to look at real GDP.
So we've been talking about these huge top-level numbers.
let's zoom in now. Let's go from that 30,000-foot view right down into the engine room of the economy, the people who actually make it all run. Let's talk about the labor market. It really is a market, just like any other. You've got your demand, and you've got your supply. The companies and businesses, they're on the demand side. They need workers. And who's on the supply side? Well, that's us, people looking for jobs, supplying our time and our skills for a wage.
Now, this brings up a really important idea for how companies think about hiring. It's called diminishing marginal product. I know it sounds a little academic, but it's actually super simple. Imagine you've got one photocopier machine. One worker can make 1,000 copies a day. Easy. But what happens if you add a second worker? Now they have to share the machine, maybe wait for their turn. The total output might not even go up. So now the output per worker has been cut in half. Each new person you add contributes less than the person before.
And that little concept explains a lot about what happens when the labor market gets out of whack. Let's say wages are set too high. Well, companies, thinking about that diminishing product, are going to hire fewer people. But at the same time, those high wages make more people want to work. So you end up with way more people looking for jobs than there are jobs to go around. And the result? Unemployment.
But what about the other way around? What if wages are too low? Well, now businesses are thrilled. They want to hire a ton of people because labor is cheap. But not many people are willing to work for that low of a wage. So you get the opposite problem, a labor shortage, with help wanted signs in every window.
Wow, okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. We went from that huge 30,000-foot view of GDP all the way down to how a single company decides to hire someone. So let's just pause for a second and put all these new tools we've collected into our economic toolkit. So here it is, your starter kit for understanding the economy. You know what macroeconomics is. It's that big picture. You know how to check the economy's pulse with inflation and unemployment, and you know the difference between GDP and GNP. And maybe most importantly, you know why you have to look at real GDP to see what's really going on. And really, when you boil it all down, it all comes together in one idea: national income. All of this activity we've been talking about, the wages people earn, the rent people collect, the profits businesses make, you add all that up, and that's a country's total income.
This isn't just about learning definitions. This is about having a new way to see the world. So the next time you hear one of those economic buzzwords on the news, you won't just hear it, you'll understand it. You've got the tools now. So my question to you is, take a look around. How healthy is the economy that you see?